The Paul Leslie Hour, helping people tell their stories. And now, your host, Paul Leslie.
Hey, it's me. I'm very pleased to be welcoming a master of songwriting. Pat Alger is a singer and songwriter, a guitarist. In addition to recordings made under his own name, songs Pat Alger wrote or co-wrote have been recorded by a large number of artists. To name just a few, Livingston Taylor, Nanci Griffith, Kathy Matea, Hal Ketchum, Peter, Paul and Mary, Lyle Lovett, Dolly Parton, and then of course the songs that Garth Brooks recorded, like The Thunder Rolls. Pat Alger is an inductee of the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame and also the Georgia Music Hall of Fame, and it's a great pleasure to welcome him here. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Paul. I just want to correct one thing. Lyle never cut any of my songs. He did sing on one of my records, but he didn't cut any of my songs.
Well, thanks for catching that.
Yeah, he didn't need my help. I think he was pretty capable of writing his own there.
So you grew up in Georgia, but you're originally from New York, is that correct?
Yeah, I was born in Long Island City, Queens, and my father was from there. My mother was from Georgia. And I went through second grade there, and at that time I didn't go to kindergarten, so second grade ended. I was still 7, so. And then we moved to Georgia, South Georgia, a place called LaGrange, when I was 7, and grew up there and went to college in Atlanta.
And so really your early musical loves, it was folk music.
Yep, I was coming of age when I got my guitar when I was about 15, I think. And what was known as the big folk scare of the 60s, when, you could actually have a hit record with a guitar, bass, and vocal, which the Kingston Trio did several times. Yeah, I was interested in, and I was interested in a lot of things, but the folk music thing was kind of struck me, at that tender age, when you're sort of questioning everything. The folk movement was about protest and stuff like that, and so I was a really easy convert to that.
So tell me, what were some of the songwriters that had the biggest impression on you? Well,
I'm coming up with I'm a peer of a lot of them. That's one of the kind of interesting things about my career. I came up with a lot of these people that recorded my songs. They weren't really much older than me when I finally got their attention. I was, kind of in their age almost, or close to it. And so I listened to all kinds of stuff. I mean, back in Georgia especially, we had 2 radio stations and they were not formatted. So you're likely to hear, 1 minute Jerry Lee Lewis, Great Balls of Fire, and next minute hear Eddie Arnold singing the Cattle Call. Even more far out than that, next thing would be Mantovani Strings playing, the theme from a summer place or something. It'd be crazy. So I was just raised around music. My mother's family was large. She had 6 brothers and sisters, and all but one of them played an instrument and sang. And so I just grew up around all kinds of music, Southern gospel music. I was raised in the Methodist church, and my parents, both of them, liked the American Songbook. There was a lot of, Gershwin and Hoagie Carmichael and stuff like that around the house. And so I really just had a great musical education. And then when the folk thing came around, what that did was it made possible for novice guitar players to, learn 6 chords and be able to play, half the repertoire. So while I was learning to play the guitar, folk music was sort of a nice outlet, and plus it was what I was always attracted to, and that's lyrically a narrative. And it's what, if I'm anything, I'm a narrative songwriter, and those folk songs were just wonderful examples of that. And we had a great library, and it had all the catalogs of Folkways records and all those small labels, Vanguard records that you wouldn't be able to buy at the record store, but you'd go to the library and listen to them. And so I heard a lot of Woody Guthrie, and I heard a lot of things like, you wouldn't even know who they are now. Cisco Houston and, Mance Lipscomb and blues guys, and it was wild. Then when I went to college in Atlanta, there was a folk music society there, and I joined it, and those were my first performances were in folk music society gatherings, and a lot of clubs, a lot of acoustic clubs there in Atlanta, and I started playing. Even though I didn't know what the hell I was doing, I started playing.
What was the atmosphere at that time in Atlanta with the folk music?
Well, it was pretty amazing, really. Atlanta was just an amazing place because I was raised in this. It was a wonderful town. LaGrange, Georgia was. I'm not going to say anything negative about it, but it was entrenched in the Jim Crow South. It was completely segregated. I went to a segregated high school. I was the last segregated class in my high school, and so it really wasn't real life as it was becoming known in the '60s. And when I went to Atlanta was 50% black. I ended up having a black roommate for a while. I was immersed in the civil rights movement, became involved with a group called the Southern Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and I did signage for them. I did my share of marching and protesting, and then of course Atlanta was one of the early places to embrace the gay liberation movement. So there was a lot, just all this stuff fomenting, and Southern rock was also being born there, but it had about 4 or 5 of these great acoustic clubs where the great folk singers of the day would make a pass through there. Steve Goodman was a regular. Jerry Jeff Walker was a regular. Let me think of some more. And of course, Jimmy Buffett that's where sort of he got his start as well. And I played with all these guys. I was opening act for them, or sometimes I played guitar with them. Also played guitar and bass with a guy named Buddy Moss, who was a blues singer from time to time. It was a wide open spaces, and if you had the nerve to think you were any good, you could sort of weasel your way onto some of these things, which I did for some reason. I thought I was okay, so I probably drove a lot of people crazy. I always show up with my guitar ready to play, whether they wanted me to play or not. So that's just. I think that's part of the what do you call it? The missing ingredient for a lot of people's success is that determination and persistence that you sometimes take on by being oblivious to your shortcomings.
Would you say that perseverance is almost as important as talent?
I would say persistence is. Perseverance is sort of a form of that. I think persistence is really the word I like to use, and I teach a lyric writing course, and that's the last thing I tell them on the last day of class is that this one word, if you're going to have it tattooed on your arm, do this one. And persistence is really the key, I think. I think there have been a lot of talented people that for whatever reason didn't have that persistence, or their egos got in the way, or they didn't have the self-confidence to keep banging against the door. And, their talents never got to blossom, but I always showed up and I was ready to go. They said they didn't like it. I never took it personally. I just rebounded pretty easily. And I think, I wasn't great, I didn't get any awards for showing up. And when I played baseball, I only got one if we won, so there's a certain amount of that growing up sort of I grew up in the South, so the South is a sports-oriented, life. If you play sports, you're not going to get many friends. So basketball and baseball and football, and my parents never came to a single game. It just wasn't that kind of world. So we only got awards. So I was used to without being a loser, So I could take the rejection. I just didn't know when to stop, and even though sometimes I wanted to stop, something in me, I couldn't leave it unfinished. So I kept on and coming. And luckily for my if you're going to be in show business, it's an artificial environment. It is not like real life. So for me, I was very fortunate that my success was very gradual, and I'd have some success, and it'd be a little, 6 months, a year, and I'd have some more. And then even when I started getting songs on the radio, it would be one, and then there would be another one sometime. But it wasn't like until I was in my 40s that I really, started ringing the bell all the time. And I just happened to, hang in there long enough until it finally came to pass.
Would you say there are any rules to what you do?
To what I do? I make my own rules. My rules are very, I've been pretty consistent. I'm not going to settle for a lyric that's not as good as I can possibly make it. I've had to force myself sometimes to change my standards a little bit so I can actually finish some songs. But songs used to take me forever till I moved to Nashville, learned some work habits and some discipline. And then when I moved here, I realized that if you just went and worked at it, you'd get there, so that was the best thing that happened here. I don't know what the rule there are forms that you learn when you're learning to write songs. And I think you learn those by listening to the masters, songwriters. But those forms are only to learn in the sense that you want to absorb the nature of what something good is, and then you have to do it on your own terms, So I was always trying to change what I was hearing as well as, embrace it in a certain way. I had my first hit was with a guy named Livingston Taylor, but it was a song I wrote for myself, because I liked that kind of music. It just turned out it was perfect for him, and he changed it a bit. And I learned right off that, that's part of what artists do if they're going to cut your songs. They're going to change what they need to change to make it believable for them. And that was a really interesting lesson to learn. And I learned a lot from Livingston Taylor, actually. Here's another interesting thing about my career is that a lot of really great songwriters cut my songs. So I had to gain confidence every time that happened, I remember having Everly Brothers record a song, and the Everly Brothers, they wrote some of their biggest hits themselves. And so when they cut a song, you got to figure they know what a good song is. So that's a big confidence booster. And then Livingston, of course, probably wrote most of his songs back in those days. So when he puts you one of the only self-written songs on your album and it becomes a single, you got to start thinking, well, maybe he knows something I don't know. And you start to gain a little more confidence. But a lot of it is just that the persistence, and part of that persistence is about commitment. Part of that commitment is about perseverance. They're all connected, It's just so easy to quit at any point because it is really hard to get people's attention, unless it just happens like every once in a while somebody like Jackson Browne comes along and he writes at 17, writes the record of his career, but that didn't happen to me.
That song that you were talking about that Livingston Taylor recorded, First Time Love.
Yeah.
He was a guest on this show. Very, very interesting guy.
Oh, great. He is. I just played with him recently.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
I'm curious, how did he come to find that song?
I was opening a show. I was in a duo with Artie Traum, and we had made a record for Rounder Records, and we were on a little tour opening a show for him in Westchester, Pennsylvania. It was in a little theater, and we had a dressing room for a change, so we were in the dressing room kind of warming up for the show. And we were warming up on that song because we had just cut it, and we were kind of working it up, really. And he just poked his head in and said, "What's that song?" Kind of like that. And he said what I've heard a million times in my career: "I'm looking for one more song for my album." And I've heard that a million times. and he said, you need to send me that tomorrow. And he was like, I could look at him and tell he was pretty serious. But I didn't really the record hadn't come out yet, and our version of it was a little, kind of slick. I didn't want to send that to him. I didn't want him to do the exact version. So I just did a boombox version of the song, and I sent 3 songs to him, really rough sounding boombox versions of these songs. And he cut two of them, and two of them became singles, and it's just that easy when you get lucky. That's where the luck comes in from the persistence. The persistence got me to the gig, and then the luck came in because he was walking by the door when we were playing that song.
We're joined by singer-songwriter Pat Alger. What was the catalyst? What was the inspiration that got you to decide, I need to move to Nashville?
Well, I'd been, okay, I mean, I'd been in Atlanta. I spent 7 years in Atlanta, got to the top of the heap there, and it wasn't a very large heap to get to the top of. I played all the best clubs, occasionally opening shows for people. I played all the coffee houses I could in the South. And I got to a point where that was it. That's either stay here and do this for the rest of your life or see what was going on somewhere else. And then I met a guy named John Harold from Woodstock, New York, and I'd already met Artie Traum and Happy Traum from Woodstock. And he heard some of my songs. He played a little club that I played all the time, and he said, you ought to just move up to Woodstock. Kind of stuff you're writing. You're not going to get arrested around here. And he was right. I wasn't going to get arrested around here. Not for a record deal anyway, which I was trying to do at the time. I was trying to be an artist. So I went up to Woodstock, and I did, it was kind of foolhardy. I didn't really know what I was getting into. My friend John Harold, who talked me into coming up, moved like 2 weeks later to Los Angeles. So he kind of talked me into it and then abandoned me. And then Artie Traum saved my life, though. He was as close to a brother as I'll probably ever have, and he would just find ways to use me when he was playing gigs, and I stayed alive. But it wasn't a jumping off place. It was a place to come after you'd already made it. So I realized I had to get out of there. So I went to Manhattan for a couple of years, and that's where I got the Livingston Taylor cut. And if you've ever been to Manhattan, that's a tough way to go. And, I was really from the South. I mean, at this point, that's where I identified with. And my friend Jim Rooney and another guy named Bill Dale here wrote a song called Going Gone With that became my first number one record. We're both in Nashville and both kept urging me to come down. And finally, I just had enough of New York. And I ended up in the middle of July in Nashville, Tennessee, without a real clue what I was going to do. But luckily I was making a little bit of royalty income from a couple of songs that had been recorded. And I just fell in with the crowd. Everybody I met that first month I was in Nashville turned out to be important people in my life. And, just one of those miracles of I took the chance and I packed it all up and it paid off. I know I could name 10 people that didn't work out for, I don't know why it was me. I like to think my talent had something to do with it, but I know it didn't have everything to do with it. So I got down here and I really enjoyed it. It was laid back. I could get in the door right off the bat, made a demo with some guys and that were top studio guys. And when the session was over, I went to pay them and they wouldn't take a check. They said, "Hey man, first one's free. Welcome to town." So I kind of knew I was in the right place. And one of those songs got picked up by a guy in Canada, and it was like a top 10 country hit up there. And it just gradually little things like that kept happening until I finally had a big record with Kathy Matea.
And tell us about that recording, the Kathy Matea cut.
Well, I didn't have anything to do with it, really. The song had been recorded by Nanci Griffith, and then again it had been recorded by some other people in England. And then my favorite singer of all time, Don Williams, was going to be doing a duet with Barbara Fairchild, and he and Barbara Fairchild recorded that. And, well, they were being produced by Alan Reynolds. By this time, Kathy Matea had heard Nanci Griffith's version and was very interested in the song, but Alan Reynolds was producing her, so she knew that he wouldn't do it if that record was going to come out. Well, for one time, I got unlucky and lost the cut on Don Williams and Barbara Fairchild, but I got a Kathy Matea cut out of it, which turned out to be her first number one and my first number one. And that's just the crazy thing, which I have this, I have this sort of mantra that if somebody doesn't, you pitch a song to somebody and you think they're going to do it, and then they don't do it, and I always go, well, there's a bigger plan somewhere down the road, so I just don't worry about it anymore.
So you really just have to keep the faith.
Well, look, here's the deal. One of the things I learned early on, if you're not going to keep it, who's going to keep it for you?
Good point.
You have to take responsibility for your life at some point. And, by this time I'm in my mid-30s. I've got a kid, I'm married. I had a lot of responsibilities. So I had no problem taking responsibility for my success, And I had great friends, everybody was very supportive. You cannot underestimate what it feels like to have good quality people telling you, hang in there, kid, you're going to make it. It really made a big difference.
You mentioned a moment ago the songwriter and producer Alan Reynolds.
Yeah, you couldn't find a better more song-friendly producer than him. Plus, he's one of the great songwriters of all time, too. He's in the Songwriters Hall of Fame as well. That's one of the kind of amazing things, really, to have ended up in the Songwriters Hall of Fame with all these guys that are my idols. It's just that's mind-boggling,
What did that feel like when they announced it?
Well, I knew about it, of course, ahead of time. But when, it's up there and you're getting the award, and, Alan Reynolds presented me with the award, and Garth Brooks sang for me, and, and they're all saying these great things about you, and you're kind of going, you sure you got the right guy, and then, next thing you know, this is one thing, this is what I said in my speech, actually. But then again, I said, thank you. At the end of all my thank yous, I said, well, I know one thing. On Tuesday morning, I'm going to have a little bit of swagger when I take the trash cans out to the curb, because it's back to real life. But, you sort of walk tall for a little while.
A moment ago, you said there wasn't a more song-friendly producer than Alan Reynolds.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, he just had this. Well, he was, first of all, I think that's partially due to the fact that he was a great songwriter himself, and he also worked with another great songman for many, many years. A couple of them, as a matter of fact. If I could name the people that he was working with were Jack Clement, who produced some of the greatest hits of country music. Some of his songwriting partners were Dickie Lee, who wrote She Thinks I Still Care, Bob McDill, who wrote every great song you ever wanted to write yourself. And he was just involved with so many songs that were naturally great to begin with, that anything that was not up to that standard, I don't think he ever showed any interest in. He was very. I knew that if Alan, we sort of had a partnership publishing wise, and a lot of people would think, well, that gives you a leg up. And in fact, the truth of the matter is, I think he held me to a much higher standard than any other person coming through the door, because he did not want any kind of hint of, whatever you want to call it, favoritism, and to be mentioned with his name on it, because he was the only producer I knew that took home bags of cassettes every weekend and listened to every song. So I had to write up to his standard. I had, we didn't have big conversations about it, but I knew if Alan said, "Hey, that third song you cut the other day, that's good. I might," and he would always say this, "I might play that for Kathy or somebody." He wouldn't say he was going to play it or that he thought they were going to cut it. He'd go, "I might play that for her," like he's still thinking on it, and so you always knew that if he went ahead and pitched a song on your behalf, that he had the greatest confidence that it was the right song. And he also never pressured any artist to record a song. He simply presented it with his explanation why he thought it was great. But he never went, "Hey, I know, you're not listening to me. We need to cut this." He would never do that. he always, the artist was the arbiter of their own good taste, and he respected that. And he knew a good song was going to find its way anyway. So that was the other part of it, you know. So that kind of, whatever you want to call it, I guess we would call that today integrity. That kind of integrity, being around that, very inspirational. You know when you, it's like going fishing. If you really get, I'm not much of a fisherman, but if I ever catch a big fish, you got to have a lot of respect for it, because there were a lot of things involved. It was the equipment in the time of day and the guy driving the boat or whatever. It just wasn't me throwing my line in the water.
And largely, you prefer to collaborate with another artist, correct?
Well, I always write some songs by myself, but coming here, I learned this crazy thing called co-writing. It's not a natural experience to begin with, but for me, it really became sort of the discipline of my own songwriting. I knew that if I was going to show up with another songwriter, I was going to have a lot of respect for them, and I was going to do my best. And I just had a knack for sort of immersing myself in, they could tell me their story, and I could just put myself in that picture. There's a guy named Jimmy Wayne here who was a great singer, great songwriter. He sort of forsook, is that a word? He gave up his commercial career to go and raise awareness for foster children. So he took this walk from Nashville to Arizona, and took 7 months. And along the way, he filmed it, and much of it, and recorded incidents on little recorders, and took still photographs. And he had this great story to tell, but he didn't know how to tell it. But he could tell me the story. And he told me that story, and he and I sat there and wrote this his life for that 7 months. And I wrote probably 98% of the lyrics to that 14 songs we wrote, because I've just got this knack for immersing myself in somebody else's story. And that's just because I'm a born storyteller, I guess. And so that's what I'm known for. Melody-wise, I guess I'm known for writing things that are pretty singable. But the hard part's always the lyric writing. I teach a master class in lyric writing, and we don't use music, and it blows their minds when I tell them that. I say it's a blank page, and you got to fill it up with something that looks like a song. And I can tell by looking at most of your songs whether they're any good without even reading them. It's an interesting way to do it. But a lot of it's just been, trial and error. I used to struggle over lyrics when I first came to Nashville. It's a difficult, it's hard to, if I could tell a kid how to write a song, then I would be in a lot of demand. But I can only tell a songwriter how to get to be a better songwriter. So we have seniors in the songwriting program, and that's our students. So they're already songwriters. I'm just trying to teach them how to be better ones.
As we mentioned at the top of the interview, there's a long list of artists that have recorded your songs, and we didn't even mention all of them. I mean, there were others, Crystal Gale, George Hamilton IV.
Yep, that's one of my first cuts. I got in Nashville. I got 2 or 3 cuts by him.
He was a great singer.
He was a wonderful person too.
Yeah?
Yeah, he really was.
What recording that an artist made surprised you the most?
Oh, surprised me the most? That's a good question. Well, they're all surprising, I have to say. I mean, that's a glib, easy out, but it is really always just kind of fascinating, to hear. Well, when I heard the Everly Brothers singing one of my songs, that was a little hard to. My uncles, I had twin uncles, in Leora and Lamar, and they taught me, my first song that I learned from them was Kathy's Clown. I had this long adolescent attachment to the Everly Brothers. So when I heard them singing a song, it was pretty moving, to say the least. I got my first A in English writing a paper in the 11th grade on Peter, Paul and Mary, and then they cut a song, and that was pretty special moment. But I'm always surprised. I'm always anxious to hear what somebody does with it, because one of the things you learn if you're going to write songs for other people is I write the song. After the song's written, I let it go. It's somebody else's thing after that, I don't fall in love with my songs. I like to tell people I'm not married to them. They're just one night stands, and I move on to the next one. And so I don't fall in love with my work. I appreciate some songs more than others, but I don't have favorites. I don't really sit around pondering, my whatever you want to call it, my own personal greatness is not something I think about, and I don't really ascribe to that anyway. I think I've been a pretty good writer of songs, but more than that, you can't get me to say much more than that.
So many people who are artists, they pray, they just hope to one day have a song like The Thunder Rolls, for example.
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
I'm hoping you can tell us about how you met Garth Brooks and what it's like to write with him.
Well, I met him. He was having his first meeting with Alan Reynolds, and he was coming out of Alan's office, which was across the hall from the person who did our royalty accounting. And I happened to be in that office looking at something, and I was coming out, and they were coming out at the same time. He just introduced us. He looked, Garth looked like this bigger than life kind of, cowboy to me. I've never owned any cowboy boots or a hat. So anybody that dresses that way is always kind of gets my attention. He was decked out in the whole deal that day. And Alan said, "Hey, you ought to take a chance and write some songs with this guy." And so I ended up going and seeing him play. He turned out he was playing that night. So I went out and saw him, and I thought he was fantastic. And, we wrote, the second song we wrote was The Thunder Rolls. He came in with the idea himself. The idea came from a song I'd written with Mark Sanders that Kathy Matea called Like a Hurricane. There's a line in there about thunder rolling, and he had been listening to that. He said, "Wouldn't it be cool if we wrote a cheating song where every time the guy did something bad, the thunder rolled?" And then we kind of just jumped on it like a dog on a bone and wrote it really fast. So, we finished it by lunch, and we recorded it by then. And the demo of that song is really just me and him. It's exactly like the record. It came out exactly like the record. It's just the way I like to write, with an arrangement in mind, with even a part if there's a possibility of a signature guitar part or something, I write that. And I played the guitar on the record, actually. He knows what he wants. That's the best thing you can say about him. And he contributes in a major way to everything. Sometimes it's the actual line. Sometimes he leads you to the line. Sometimes as far as melodies go, I would always map out the chords, and he would actually sing the melody he wanted to sing. So the melodies are actually his. The chord arrangements are mine. He's an equal partner and a great partner. We wrote for about 6 months, and then he became Garth Brooks. So after that, it's a different ballgame. So I think we might have written one song after that. But at the time I got him, and by the time I had him to myself, he was just a guy from Oklahoma named Garth. So it was wonderful, and we had a great time. He's a very nice man. He still is. Very trustworthy. He's the hardest working guy I've ever met, and a great role model for anybody that's wanted to be an artist or a songwriter or just a honest person. He's a real dude.
What is it, do you think, that resonates with so many people about the Thunder Rolls?
I would be the first to be mystified by that. I don't know, because I finally saw the show for the first time, the big show that everybody goes to. And I went for the first time because he sort of guilted me into it. He called me up and said, "How many tickets do you want? You need to be there." And I did go, and it was wonderful. It's like, going roller skating or something. I mean, it's just like a big fun evening of great songs. And I don't know. That's a good mystery. I don't really understand that. I think it's as far as, well-written narratives, it's as tightly written as any song I've ever been involved with. It's very visual song. And then it's got the big chorus. I mean, the amazing thing to me, this is the other thing that's really crazy about that song. All these heavy metal bands have recorded it. It's like 15 heavy metal bands have cut it. And last year it was a number 2 hit on the heavy metal chart by a group called All That Remains. And I had a video. It's gotten about 18 million views. So I don't really know, but I'm sure happy about it. That's the workhorse. That's one of those things like you say, everybody says, if I could just write and I said it a million times, if I could just write, a song like, I could name 50 of them, if I could just write She Thinks I Still Care, but the bottom line is you can't. You just have to write the ones you write really good. And nobody knows what's going to happen with a song. I have some fantastic songs that no one will ever record. And that's okay, because I had plenty of them that they did. And, that's pretty, you just have to take what they give you, sort of. And I have. So I just been I feel very, very fortunate to have had the career I've had. And, there's people who've had 10 times bigger careers than me. And, I had a good one though. And I'm not diminishing it, but I'd always like to keep it in perspective, I'm still trying to learn something about songwriting, and I'm still in the process of teaching. I'm still trying to learn something. And that has been a lot of fun, actually. So.
I had the chance to listen to a lot of your songs, the songs that you recorded yourself. And there's a strong, your beginning is in folk music, and I love folk music, and the recordings, there's a lot of that sound in them.
Yeah. Well, I had a little band for a while, and I didn't want to do what everybody else did. Everybody has a keyboard and electric guitar and all that stuff. So I put together this kind of goofy band. It was drums, bass, harmonica, and me. And I had a background singer, a little girl by the name of Trisha Yearwood. That didn't hurt either. And, we made this strange hybrid kind of sound that was sort of country, sort of folky. But it was everything on the guitar was played fingerstyle and very syncopated, very much like, I would guess that's the beauty of whatever my success was. I didn't come here and become a different songwriter. I just became better at what I was doing. And, the first Livingston Taylor album was, that first Livingston Taylor cut was just what I was doing at the time. And, I was writing these, really lyric dense sort of pop folk songs. And I had no intention of really being in country music whatsoever. I liked it, and I grew up listening to it, in Georgia especially, But it wasn't my goal to be Country Songwriter of the Year by any stretch. I didn't even know what that meant, So you just go where life takes you, and, the records were just fun things to do. I never had any illusion I was going to be I had one brief period of illusion when I got a deal on Capitol for a record and put out that record. I thought for a second maybe I was going to have this other kind of artistic career. But when you're on Sugar Hill or Rounder, you're not going to sell, except for Alison Krauss, nobody's ever sold those kind of records. So I was just happy to be. It was fun. I never had a bad time in the studio with those guys. Those are just wonderful musicians, and the opportunity to cut with them was always just for me a party. We did them in 4 or 5 days, and we didn't labor over them. We didn't, it was no all day mixing on anything. And we might spend all day mixing, but we mixed like 8 songs, So it was just, I guess, the best part about those records for me is I can listen to them now, and it sort of captured a moment in time of who I was at the moment, and that's kind of neat.
What is the best thing about being Pat Alger?
Oh boy, I don't really know if there is anything particularly there. I guess the best thing is I'm a pretty good dad. I'm learning how to be a grandpa. Other than that, I guess the only thing I could say is, I like to help people, and when I have the opportunity to help somebody, these young people I teach especially, that's kind of satisfying. And I love to go out and play. And one of the best things about playing now is when people know the songs, and for a minute there, you bring a lot of pleasure to somebody, and then you pack it up and you go home and you just be Pat Alger again, and just, as they say, my feet stink just like everybody else's. I'm just a normal person most of the time, and occasionally I get this opportunity to be Pat Alger, the semi-famous songwriter, and that's fun. But I don't take it that seriously, to be honest.
I always like to close the interviews. I give the guest the microphone. I let them take the stage and say whatever they want. Totally open-ended.
Well, if you're trying to be a songwriter, it's a tough row, to hoe. You're looking at about a 1.5% to 2% success rate, and by success meaning you might have a 10-year career. To have a like 35, 40-year career like I have, that's just phenomenal, really. I mean, you're really talking about the top 1% of the songwriters. So it's a tough field, but it's very rewarding. I think learning how to write songs is a great thing. It's kept me out of the psychiatrist's office for years, and it's great. It's great therapy. It's great exercise. Great mental exercise. When I'm tired of yelling at the radio, the current events, I can just sit down and write something about a person I know or something that happened to me. I can sit down and write a lyric about it. So I feel very fortunate. I got to do what I set out to do. That's rare in this country. And if you have the dream, follow it as long as you can. I always tell my kids, don't have a plan B, because if you do, you will be so tempted to use it. So I didn't have a plan B, and that was, somebody had asked me to teach when 20 years ago, I would have said, get out of here. But when they asked me, I was in retirement age, and I thought, well, let's try it, see what happens. So I've learned to grow. I grew into that. I'm still looking for opportunities to do things, and I feel very fortunate to, almost 71 years old, to be still trying to grow, in mentally and spiritually, and be a better person,
My last question: who is Pat Alger? How do you define yourself?
Well, what's the old saw? I get up and put my pants on like everybody else. But probably I don't. I probably get up and put them on slower than everybody else at this age. What I am right now, I like to think that on some level, at some part of the time, I'm a bit of a role model for some young people. Most of the time, I'm a father and a grandfather. I'm a pretty good ex-husband. I was never a great husband. I'm a good friend to good friends, and fortunately have many, many of those. So that's who I am. I'm really defined by the quality of my friends, I suppose, and those relationships. And you'd have to ask them who old Pat Alger is. I don't know. I guess that's why I'm still writing songs, trying to figure that out.
Well, I've really enjoyed this chance to speak with you.
My pleasure, Paul. I hope you have great success with your projects and keep on talking to songwriters, because you sometimes find an interesting one.
I did, yes. Yeah, I've enjoyed it.
All right. Okay, man.
All right,
Good
happy
talking.
trails.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.
The Paul Leslie Hour is hosted, produced, and written by Paul Leslie for Lifestyles Entertainment. For information, visit thepaulleslie.com. Thank you for being with us. Until next time.